She laughed. You'll never be as successful as my ex. So I sent her my Fortune 500 offer letter. Now she wants me back, but I'm gone. When I was 34, I thought I had found someone who wanted to build a life with me. Emily had a way of entering a room that made people look, not because she demanded attention, but because she carried herself like she belonged there. We met during grad school, a time when I was running on coffee and a stubborn idea that the hard work would pay off. My clothes were thrifted, my meals were mostly quick and cheap, and nights were for studying or sending applications. Emily liked to say she admired my focus, that one day the long hours would be worth it. For a while, that felt true. We shared late-night takeout on our small couch, talked about what we wanted in 10 years, and made plans that felt within reach. She would listen when I talked about interviews. I would listen when she described a weekend she'd planned with friends. It wasn't perfect, but it felt honest. I felt lucky to be with someone who seemed to believe in the same things. Slowly, though, the tone of our conversations began to shift. Praise turned into comparison. Casual mentions of other people's achievements became benchmarks against which I was measured. Her ex, Ryan, was a name that kept appearing in ordinary moments. He had a job that seemed solid, a car a little nicer than ours, and an Instagram full of tidy photos. When she talked about him, it felt like she was dropping details into a ledger, not sharing a memory. At first, I tried not to notice. Everyone has a past, I told myself. What mattered was the present and what we were building together. I should have said something earlier. Maybe I could have saved some quiet hours. In the beginning, I kept hearing her say she believed in me, and I wanted to keep believing that too. I kept pushing, sending resumes, taking temporary shifts, reading until the words made sense, even when I was tired. It was draining, but I thought the sacrifice was temporary. I thought we were on the same side, cheering each other on. Then one night changed the shape of everything. We went to a small house party with mostly polite friends, and the kind you catch up with for an hour and then leave. The music was low, people moved between groups, and someone asked about my job search. I answered honestly, still looking, waiting on a few callbacks. My voice was calm, the kind that comes from having spent years getting used to uncertainty. Emily didn't pause. She laughed, but it wasn't the warm laugh I'd come to trust. It landed differently, like a line read with intent. She leaned forward and said loud enough for the circle to hear, "You'll never be as successful as Ryan. He's already miles ahead of you." I remember the hum of the party lights and how ordinary everything felt until those words. For a second, the room narrowed to the space between us. Faces blurred, voices dimmed, and the sentence hung there with an odd weight. Some people shifted, looking for a reaction as if they'd tuned into a private show. The immediate embarrassment cut through, but underneath that was a steadier ache. The slow realization that something between us had changed, and that those changes might not be small. Then she said it again, not softer, not quieter, just clear enough for everyone to understand. "You'll never be as successful as Ryan. He's already miles ahead of you." Her words landed harder than expected. The room didn't laugh out loud, but it didn't defend me either. A couple of people let out short, awkward chuckles, like they weren't sure if it was a joke or if they were supposed to join in. Nobody stopped her. Nobody shifted the conversation away. They just looked at me, waiting to see how I'd react. My face felt hot, but I forced a small smile, the kind you put on when you don't want anyone to see how much it actually hurt. Inside, though, I felt something crack. I wanted to speak up, to remind her how many nights I'd been awake past midnight preparing for interviews, or how many applications I'd carefully written when others were asleep. I wanted to remind her how often she had once told me she believed in me, but I didn't. Instead, I sat there and swallowed it whole. Not because I agreed with her, but because in that moment I realized defending myself wouldn't change the way she saw me. She had already made up her mind. I stayed quiet, but I made a promise to myself right then. This moment would not define me, but it would drive me. Later that night, back at our place, she walked in like nothing had happened. She kicked off her shoes, pulled out her phone, and started scrolling through memes, laughing at her screen while I sat at the edge of the bed, replaying her words over and over again in my head. "You'll never be as successful as Ryan." It looped, steady and sharp, like a reminder I hadn't asked for. The words didn't just sting, they dismissed me completely. It wasn't doubt. It was dismissal. To her, I wasn't a person working through a difficult season. I was a man she didn't think was worth betting on. I kept my silence. She didn't notice, or maybe she didn't care. She ordered food, asked what I wanted to drink, carried on as though the night had been ordinary. But it wasn't. In the quiet moments between her laughter at something on her phone, I sat there staring at the ceiling, understanding that everything had shifted. The woman I thought was beside me had chosen, in front of everyone, to measure me against someone from her past, and announce that I'd already lost. That kind of wound doesn't bleed on the outside, but it cuts just the same. I didn't confront her that night. I didn't need to. The damage was already done, and in its place was a fuel I hadn't known I'd need. Weeks went by, and I felt the shift growing between us. I didn't push it. I didn't argue with her about what she had said that night, but I also couldn't forget it. Something inside me had gone quiet. Where I used to tell her about my day, about interviews or opportunities one was chasing, I now kept it to myself. She didn't notice, or maybe she did, but she was too distracted to care. Her world became a rotation of brunches, influencer trips she followed online, and endless updates on Ryan. She never said his name with malice, but it carried weight every time it slipped into conversation. Ryan's traveling again. Ryan just bought a new car. Ryan's firm is doing great. It was like she couldn't resist holding him up as the standard. I stopped responding with anything more than a nod. Instead, I focused all my energy where it mattered, on myself. Every morning I woke up early, sent out applications, prepped for interviews, and picked up part-time work just to make sure I could keep moving forward. I didn't waste time explaining what I was doing. I let my silence and my efforts speak. The pressure was constant. Some days I wanted to give in, to believe the voice in my head that repeated her words, "You'll never be as successful as Ryan." But that same voice became the reason I pushed harder. Every rejection email turned into another reason to keep going. Every late night of preparation felt like one step closer to proving her wrong, but more importantly, proving myself right. Then the call came. It was from a Fortune 500 company, the kind I had only hoped would even glance at my resume. The recruiter's voice on the other end was calm, professional, and then the words came, "We'd like to extend you an offer." Not for a bottom-rung spot, but for a competitive role that most people needed years of experience to land. I sat at my desk staring at the email they sent over afterward, reading the lines again and again. Relief washed over me first, then pride, then something harder to name. For years I'd carried doubt and the weight of other people's expectations, but now, in black and white, was proof that the work had paid off. Funny thing is, the first person who came to mind wasn't my parents or my closest friends. It was Emily, the woman who had laughed, the one who told me I'd never measure up, the one who dragged Ryan's name into our lives until it echoed in the walls of our apartment. But I didn't tell her right away. I waited. That weekend, she was stretched out on the couch, scrolling through her phone with the same easy smile she always wore when she found something funny online. I glanced over her shoulder and saw it, another one of Ryan's posts. A picture of him in a suit with a caption about another business trip. She tapped like, her eyes lighting up for someone else's success story, while mine sat unopened in my inbox. I watched quietly, the offer letter still unread on her end. I knew what I was about to do would change everything between us, but I also knew it had to be done. I didn't make a speech. I didn't set up a dramatic reveal. I simply forwarded the email from HR to her phone, the official offer letter attached, clean and undeniable. No words, no explanation. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She picked it up without looking, still half smiling at whatever she'd just seen online. Then she opened it. The change was instant. The laughter on her face froze, her thumb hovering over the screen as her eyes scanned the words. She didn't move for several seconds. Then slowly, she turned her head toward me. Her eyes weren't playful anymore. They were searching, uncertain. For once, she didn't have a quick line ready. No comparison, no joke. Just silence. The woman who always had something to say suddenly had nothing. The air in the room felt different. She set the phone down carefully, like it might break if she moved too quickly. Then, almost too softly to hear, she said, "Can we talk?" I didn't answer. I leaned back in my chair and let the silence hang. For months, she had measured me against someone else, spoken as though I'd already lost. Now the facts were sitting in her inbox, and it wasn't me who looked small anymore. Over the next few days, Emily's behavior shifted. The same woman who once rolled her eyes at my late-night study sessions now asked questions about my new role. She offered to cook dinner. She complimented me out of nowhere. She even started telling her friends she was so proud of me. On the surface, it might have looked like support, but I knew it wasn't pride, it was fear. Fear that the future she'd dismissed might now be slipping away from her. Fear that she had pushed too far, that she'd humiliated the wrong man, and that the stability she craved was no longer guaranteed. I watched it unfold with a calm I hadn't felt in months. She laughed less at Ryan's posts. She praised me more often, but I couldn't forget the night at that party, her words cutting through the air while everyone else watched. The offer letter had changed the game, but it hadn't erased the damage. That night when she first asked, "Can we talk?" That was the moment I realized it. She hadn't been on my side all along. She had been waiting to see if I'd become someone worth standing next to. And now that the proof was in her hands, she wanted to rewrite the past. I wasn't ready to let her. The following week, I kept my distance, even though Emily tried to play the part of a supportive partner. She cooked dinners, asked me questions about my day, even told me she always knew I'd make it. On the outside, it might have seemed like we were stronger than before, but I knew better. Every compliment felt rehearsed. Every smile seemed calculated. It wasn't love, it was survival. She wasn't proud of me. She was scared of losing the version of me she had once mocked. By the end of my first week at the new job, I'd had enough of the act. One night, we sat across from each other at dinner. The food was untouched, her wine glass half full. She looked at me with glossy eyes and said, in the softest voice she could manage, "I'm so glad you didn't give up on us. I always knew you'd get here." The words hung in the air, sweet on the surface but hollow underneath. I set my fork down and looked at her directly. "No, Emily, you didn't always know. You laughed. You told me I'd never be as successful as your ex. You embarrassed me in front of people I considered friends. You didn't believe in me. You dismissed me." Her face shifted, the mask slipping. She reached across the table, trying to grab my hand. "I didn't mean it like that. I was drunk. It was just a joke." I pulled my hand back before she could touch me. "No, it wasn't a joke. You meant it, and I'll never forget it." The color drained from her face. For the first time since I'd known her, she didn't have a way to spin the situation. She sat back in her chair, lips pressed tight, eyes shining with the beginning of tears. I didn't feel anger in that moment. I felt clarity. She hadn't just said something careless. She had shown me how little faith she had in me when it mattered most. The rest of the meal was quiet. She poked at her food, occasionally stealing glances at me, but I stayed calm. I'd said what I needed to say, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't carrying her judgment around like a weight. The truth was out. Her tears started before the plates were cleared. She leaned forward, voice shaky, words rushing out like she could fix everything if she just said enough. I didn't mean it the way it came out. "You know I love you." I was stressed. I'd been drinking. I didn't think. "Please don't let one mistake ruin us." I stayed quiet, watching her scramble for excuses. It wasn't one mistake. It was months of comparisons, months of Ryan's name showing up like an unwanted guest at our table. It was the way she had looked right at me that night and laughed, as if my work and sacrifices were nothing more than a punchline. "You laughed at me when I had nothing," I said finally. "And now that I have something, you want to act like you believed in me all along. That's not love, Emily. That's convenience." Her face crumpled. She reached for my hand again, but I pulled back. This time, she didn't argue. She just whispered, "Please don't leave me." But I already knew it was over. The next weekend, I packed my bags. She begged the entire time, pleading, guilt-tripping, even accusing me of throwing away years together. But none of it landed. Walking out of that apartment with my suitcase in hand, I felt lighter than I had in months. The world seemed strangely calm after. I started settling into my new role, meeting people who saw potential in me instead of limitations. For once, I didn't feel like I was climbing with someone dragging me back down. Then came a moment I hadn't expected. At a networking event, I ran into Ryan, the man whose name had haunted my relationship, the ghost I'd been compared to more times than I could count. He shook my hand, polite but tired looking. He still had the car, still wore the polished suit, but there was something heavy in his expression. Over drinks, he admitted his firm was laying people off, and he wasn't sure how long he'd last. The picture Emily had painted of him, the flawless, successful ex I could never measure up to, was just that, a picture. Behind it was someone stressed, burned out, and barely holding on. It hit me then how pointless the comparisons had been all along. Ryan was never the problem. The problem was Emily, and the way she chose to belittle me when I was at my lowest. Walking home that night, I felt no anger toward him, just clarity. I hadn't been competing with Ryan. I'd been competing with Emily's need to make me feel small. The weeks after I left were quiet, but in a way that felt peaceful. My new role challenged me, but it also came with something I hadn't had in years, people who believed in me. My mentors pushed me, trusted me, and reminded me that all the late nights and small sacrifices had been worth it. I no longer felt like I had to prove my worth to someone sitting across from me at dinner, waiting for me to fail. Meanwhile, Emily's voice still tried to find its way back into my life. At first, it was short texts, "I miss you." Then longer ones, "I'm proud of you. I always knew you could do it." Eventually, she sent me paragraphs about how she regretted what she'd said, how it was just a bad night, how maybe we could start over. I never replied, because by then I understood something I hadn't before. Success isn't about proving people wrong. It's about proving yourself right. I didn't work hard to get a new job just to hold it up in front of Emily like a trophy. I did it because I knew I was capable, and I wanted the life I had been fighting for. Emily had shown me who she really was the night she laughed in front of everyone. When someone mocks you at your lowest, they don't deserve to stand beside you at your best. Ryan stopped being a shadow in my life, too. Running into him at that event had cleared the last of the fog. His life wasn't perfect, and mine didn't need to be compared to his. The truth was simple. The comparisons had never mattered. The only thing that mattered was respect, and Emily had broken that long before my offer letter ever arrived. Months later, I sat at my desk one evening after work and saw her name pop up again with a message. "I've been thinking about you a lot. I miss us. Can we talk?" I closed the notification without opening it. For once, there was no weight in the decision. No curiosity, no hesitation. Just quiet certainty. I had walked away from her not just with a new job, but with something far more valuable, self-respect. Emily laughed once, certain I'd never measure up. But in the end, I didn't need to say a word. My life spoke for itself, and she was left with the silence. I appreciate you watching till the end. Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more content.